Welcome to the Australian Hiker Podcast, Australia's longest-running hiking podcast, downloaded over 750,000 times in over 160 countries and providing you with an Australian perspective on all things hiking. We're your hosts, Tim and Jules Savage, coming to you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country.
This is episode 251 of the Australian Hiker Podcast. And in this episode, we provide an introduction to our upcoming trip on the Western Australian Cape to Cape Track. We hope you enjoy. Before we get into today's episode, if you'd like to help support Australian Hiker and this podcast, there are a couple of ways that you can help us out. Firstly, by subscribing on your podcast host of choice so that each episode is available as soon as it's published. And if you have the opportunity, leave us a 5-star review. Another way to support us is go to the Australian Hiker website at www.australianhiker.com.au and click on the Support Us page and buy us a coffee. You can do a one-off donation or become a monthly supporter. All donations are greatly appreciated and help us to continue producing this podcast and blog. Now let's get on to today's episode. This is the first in a planned series of 4 podcast episodes, in addition to a full write-up to be released over the coming weeks on our upcoming trip on the Western Australian Cape to Cape Track. In this episode, we set the scene for our upcoming trip and provide some background on what we expect our experience to be. First up, let's just look at some logistics in relation to this trail. As the name suggests, this walk travels between 2 capes on the Western Australian coastline. Cape Naturalist in the north and Cape Leeuwin in the far south. So depending on which direction you travel, one of those 2 capes is going to be your destination point. And in fact, it could almost be called the light-to-light walk because you're essentially walking between the lighthouses on those 2 capes.
I think there's another one called that, isn't there?
Yeah, well, there is. there is, and that's in New South Wales, so maybe that's why they've called it the Cape to Cape walk. Now, distance-wise, I've seen a number of different distances attributed to this walk, and it seems to be somewhere between around about the 123-kilometre to around about the 135-kilometre distance. So we'll soon find out exactly what that's supposed to be once we actually do the walk. It's classed as a grade 4 walk, and given the distance, that's not unreasonable. And looking at the walk, it's not I won't class this as a hill walk. Yes, there are undulations. Yes, there is ups and down on this trail, but it's not like you're walking through the Australian Alps. So there's not a huge gradient difference between this track as you go. And I think in all honesty, it's probably at best around about 100 metres, maybe 150 metres. So it's not going to be a physically demanding walk in relation to going up and down hill. However, having said that, there is beach walking and sand walking involved, and that will create a bit more exertion on the walk.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's which torture do you wish for, I think, is probably the question, isn't it?
And it's interesting, just having some comments made from a few people who live in Western Australia and have done this walk. They talk about the sand walking and how hard it can be. I must admit, I don't mind beach walking. Yes, it can slow you down depending on the type of sand, but I do like walks that hug and travel along the ocean. So definitely looking forward to this one. The recommendation for this walk is between 5 to 7 days, and we've chosen to do this in 6 days. Now, having said that, the first day is a fairly short day, and we'll talk about distances in a moment. But realistically, we've got a bit of leeway. We're not pushed for time. In fact, most of the days are relatively comfortable, with only one really long day, and the rest of the days being, I won't say easy, but manageable. Now, we've chosen to go north to south, and really your choice is north to south or south to north. And I must admit, when I first started planning this walk, I had originally decided to travel from the south heading back north. That's a habit that I've always tended to have because I like walking towards my final destination or walking towards home. And in this case, we're going to be flying into and out of Perth Airport. So that would have been my preference, is to finish north and have less of a distance travelling back to Perth on the final day of travel. What threw that out was by the time that we actually got into Augusta, which is the southern town, and got out to the start of the walk and started walking. It was going to be reasonably late in the afternoon, and sunsets around about 5:45, 6 o'clock-ish, and that means we would have been getting into camp, if not on dark. And this means we would have been getting into camp either in the dark or just on dark. The other issue was also that we had to deal with accommodation issues. So we've decided to tack 5 days on to the start of Easter, and that's sort of a time of the year where everyone wants to travel. So in the lead up between school holidays and Easter and everything else, accommodation was going to be an issue. And in fact, the very most southern campsite on this track is closed at the time of this recording due to bushfires late in 2022. So it wasn't that we could do a short distance. We were basically put upon to do a certain distance to try and get there, and that would have made things just a bit harder. The other thing that also we had to deal with is that some of the accommodation bookings that we've had to put in place just didn't work going south to north. Again, we sort of hit a lot of the main holiday areas on the weekends during Easter, which made things a bit harder. In the planning phase of this walk, I spent probably a day and a half and almost got to the stage where I'd pulled the pin on this walk and I'd started looking at other destinations because it was going to be so hard. And it wasn't until I realised that I could actually get a direct flight from Canberra to Perth on the Thursday night rather than having to originally travel as planned on the Friday morning, that it made things much easier and gave us a bit of extra leeway in the time we had. And when I looked at it, travelling north to south actually worked out for us. But again, the choice really is yours which way you go. I don't think there's any harder destination as far as potential hills or issues like that, but it was more about the logistics in relation to accommodation and transport, trying to try and transport flying in from interstate. I think if you lived in Western Australia and you can drive somewhere or have someone drop you off, it's a lot easier. But when you've got to tack in a domestic airfare before and after, and particularly when Easter's concerned, we needed to lock things in place and not flexible airfares weren't going to work for us.
Yeah, that's right. And it did take a lot of working through. I think if you're in WA, it's probably going to be a little bit easier, but it's going to be a planes, trains and automobiles kind of trip. So we're looking forward to that.
So we end up flying into Perth on the Thursday night. Friday we get a train to Bunbury and then a bus to Dunsborough. And that gets us there, I think, roughly around about 1:15. And then I just sort of go to the local outdoor store, which apparently is around about 50 metres away from where the bus drops us off, and pick up a gas canister. Because again, we can't carry gas on the plane with us. We don't have an option of picking up gas on the Thursday night, so we're going to have to do it in Dunsborough itself. And I've already organised that and put an order in, so we just need to walk in and say, hey, this is such and such, and have we come to pick up the gas. From there, we'll actually we'll be lazy. We could potentially walk out to the lighthouse, but we'll probably end up getting a taxi out there, get dropped off at the lighthouse, do a bit of touring around, and then start our walk south. And in fact, on the first day, we've got a distance of 10.3 kilometres to travel. So that's actually quite doable and gets us into our campsite during the daytime without too much difficulty. The return trip is pretty much the same. We actually finished this trip up in Augusta. We stay in Augusta overnight on the last day. We get a bus and then a train back to Perth. So we're doing the reverse. That takes a bit longer. I think we've actually got a 4-hour stop somewhere to line everything up. So we don't actually get back into Perth on that last day or on the day of travel until I think around about 5 o'clock. So it's a long day, even though it's only an extra 130 kilometres travelling, just because of how we have to link the different types of transport together. Just before we head off and look at the distances, the other issue with north to south is, do you want the sun sun rises in the east and sets in the west? If we're heading south, we basically have it on our left-hand side. If you're travelling north, we have the sun on our right-hand side. Now, it's not as if we're travelling east to west. We're basically pretty much travelling north to south. So really it doesn't make too much of a difference in relation to the impact on the sun on this walk.
Well, it's actually on the left and then on the right.
Yeah. Well,
depending on the direction, it's on both. It's on both sides.
It is.
Depends on the time of the day, Tim.
It is, but I mean, I think because we're virtually right on the coastline, it's going to be for most of the day. It's going to be on that left-hand side of the trail to a great extent. But we'll see how it goes. In all honesty, I don't think the issue really is the sunlight. I think it really is more for us the accommodation and the transport that were the issues that forced our hand on the direction we were travelling. Now, distance-wise, day one, 10.3 kilometres. We potentially could have gone another 3 kilometres and stayed in a holiday/caravan park, but that was booked up. Because, again, the issue was it was going to put us into a weekend, and everyone else has decided they were going camping that weekend. So the first campsite is a walk-in campsite only, whereas the one 3 kilometres down the road basically is you can drive in, and we potentially could have booked a cabin, but I think from memory we needed to book it for 2 nights. And in all honesty, I think from memory there were no cabins or accommodation available in that site at all. So stopping 3 kilometres shorter gives us the ability to actually tent it. And we don't have facilities. We're going to have to go and dig holes if we want to go and use the toilet. But it's a situation where it makes it a bit easier for us.
Yeah, and I think, if you're hiking and you want that experience, then, for me, I like to stay away from the cars and the caravans.
And we pretty much are tenting this all the way, whether we're staying in a holiday park/caravan park or at a dedicated hiking campsite cars can't get to, we are tenting it all the way. Day 2 was 22.8 kilometres. Day 3, 18.8 kilometres. Day 4, which is our big day, which is 27.4 kilometres. And again, that was one of those distances that, short of camping in the middle of nowhere, which is frowned upon in Western Australia, really that's the distance we need to walk to. So that's our big day. If we start walking at around about 7:30 in the morning and average 3 kilometres per hour, 8 or 9 hours will get us there without too much difficulty.
So with that one, that was a requirement. There's just nowhere to camp in between, is that right?
Not as far as I could tell. Maybe there is, and it just wasn't obvious to me. But certainly there weren't any campsites listed. There weren't any holiday parks listed. And there was really no real option on that. So that's the big day. We potentially could have walked off trail and gone into a town somewhere, but I prefer to stay on trail and just do that rather than have to walk off trail a couple of kilometres to pick up a small town. So that was our reasoning behind that one. Day 5, 20 kilometres, and then day 6, which takes us to Augusta, is 24 kilometres. Now, again, had we have had the ability to use that campsite that had been impacted by fire, that would have made a difference to those distances. But again, wasn't available and still isn't available at this point in time. So not unreasonable distances, one big day or one really big day. 24 kilometres is still a good day as well. But 24 kilometres takes us to the Southern Lighthouse, the Southern Cape. And that way we can, again, either if we feel enthusiastic, we can walk into Augusta, or we'll just call a taxi and get picked up. Just depends on how we feel for the day.
I'm just thinking about the 12 Apostles walk where Tim didn't count in the fact that we had 3 kilometres to walk to the motel to pick up the car. And he got to the information centre at the 12 Apostles. He had absolutely nothing left. And I had to drop my pack and walk the 3 kilometres to get the car to come back and pick him up. In the meantime, I think I go about 500 metres up the road carrying absolutely nothing except the keys, and I got just stormed on and, pretty much washed away. Made me move faster. By the time I got back, I was reasonably dry because of that. But, yes, thank you.
That's all right. Now, as far as other logistics in relation to this track's concerned, no trail fees, which is pretty typical in Western Australia. No park access fees. So whereas in Tasmania you pay a park access fee, in this case you don't. As far as dollars are concerned, the bus/train trip from Perth to Dunsborough is just on $45 per person, and that's at March 2023. And the return trip from Augusta to Perth by train and bus is $56.75. So that's the extra distance we've got to travel there, increases the price slightly. The only other expenses really are, obviously our transport to Perth and back and our accommodation, which we'd sort of booked well in advance. And also food as well. So again, that's going to be an expense that has to be built in. Food's all packed and all ready to go. So, it's what we decide to eat if we go out for dinner along the way. Trail tread is pretty much a combination of natural trail, beach and rock walking with the occasional timber and constructed trail along the way. And I'm guessing there will be some management road as well. And there is potentially one detour because there is one crossing that we may need to do, which is to cross the head of Margaret River. And this is something that's really interested me. There is no easy place to find out whether the inlet at Margaret River there is open or closed. I've looked at satellite images, but the dates don't tell me when it was. I can't find anywhere where you type in, is the river mouth at Margaret River open or closed? And there's just that just doesn't come up as a search. So I've sent a couple of emails to West Australian Parks and also to one of the tourist facilities at Margaret River just to try and get an indication. If it is not crossable from a walking perspective, we then have a detour, which adds probably a 1 or 2 kilometres at most, but takes us inland over a bridge to skirt around and come back to the coast again. So we end up in the same point. It's just how we get there. So I'll have that answer in the next couple of days. And certainly as we walk our way along, I'll certainly make sure I have that answer, but so we know we're heading one direction or another.
Yeah, and I guess even if today it's clear, it's not necessarily clear tomorrow. So, depends on weather conditions and rain and tides and all of those sorts of things. So, it's just going to be one of those things that we'll feel our way through.
Facilities-wise, it depends on where we're staying. Most of the campsites will have water available. And certainly the caravan parks, which we're staying at 2 of over the trip, will have things like showers and powered sites if we want to get really enthusiastic. But and I think in one location I had to book a powered site. That was the base grade site that was available. So if we desperately need to, we can plug in our electronics. But that was just an added bonus. The hiking dedicated sites really just are plain flat ground, and that's about it, with water as well. But otherwise, there's no toilets on a lot of those sites, and not expected shelters or huts like you would expect on the Bibbulmun track as well. So not expecting a lot of fancy facilities as we go, apart from the caravan parks. It's fuel stoves only, no fires, and we're not big fire users when we go hiking and camping anyway. Water on trail, as mentioned, is either local creeks or rainwater tanks, and potentially we do stop through some towns as well, so we can always top up with water as we go. Mobile reception, from what I can tell, the top third of the trail is in the northern half of the trail is in reasonably good service, but the bottom 2/3 of the southern end of the trail, the phone access is a bit variable. So we'll certainly try and post as we go, but it'll be interesting to see what access we do get. Time of the year to walk is pretty much going to vary. There's nothing really stopping you from walking it at any time of the year. However, the heat in summertime is probably something you want to try and avoid. And the other thing with Western Australia as well is late November through till probably around about late March is bushfire season. And as I said, one of the campsites on this trail had fire damage to it, I believe, in late 2022, from what I can tell, and is no longer available to be used, or at least not available to be used at the time we're doing it. So there's always the potential for fires, and as it stands at the moment, the fires in that area are okay. There's no bushfires going on, but again, it is something to keep an eye out for. Temperature-wise, during summer, sort of January, February, maximum minimum ranges between about 14 to 29 degrees Celsius. And at the time we're looking at doing this, which is late March, early April, we're expecting the temperature range to be approximately around about 12 degrees at night time and about 25 degrees maximum during the day. And that's certainly warmer than I would have preferred. I mean, most of my time that I do hikes or we do hikes, we tend to do between about May and September, just because it's a bit cooler.
Just because of you.
Yeah. So in this case through here, this is certainly warmer than I would like. I would like it 10 degrees cooler during the day. So that's certainly going to impact on how fast we travel and how often we take breaks.
Well, 25 degrees and it's a reasonably dry climate. It's not a tropical climate, so the humidity shouldn't be too bad. But, 25 degrees I think it's pretty nice.
Yeah. And I think in all honesty, I'll be inclined to start early. I'd rather start early and finish early than start late and get the heat through the day. So we'll see how we go on the days, and we'll see, particularly the shorter days, that won't be too difficult. Gear-wise, we're both using packs around about the 50-litre mark on this, and we're actually just testing some new packs on this walk. So, but volume-wise, that should be fine. We've gone through and put our food together, and we always do food as a day pack, if you like. So we've got two people's food in a pack, so we'll split those apart when we go through and do our test pack in a couple of nights' time. Two-person tent as opposed to a one-person tent.
Yeah, that's good. I was wondering where you were going to sleep.
Yeah. So, and again, our two-person tent is probably only 300 grams more than our one-person tent. So when you split up the weight between two people, it actually works out quite well. The other thing I'd mention with gear here, almost without fail, on every walk I've done over the last 7 or 8 years, I've always carried a puffy jacket, and I'm really tempted not to on this walk. Given the minimum nighttime temperature is supposed to be 12 degrees, I don't think I'll need a puffy jacket. I've got enough other clothing with a rain jacket and thermal layers that I can put those on if need be, if it does cool down. So I'm likely to lose the puffy jacket for this walk. Not a huge bulk, I suppose, and not a huge weight, but I think my sleeping bag, I'm going to be sleeping with the bag open most nights. Because, this is a bag designed for sort of -4 or 5. If I'm getting 12 degrees, that's going to be a bit on the warm side.
Yeah, my puffy jacket is going to be in my pack along with my gloves and my beanie, just in case.
Speaking of gloves, I won't be carrying thermal gloves, but I will be carrying fingerless sun gloves. Because, it is going to be warm, using tracking poles, very easy to get sunburn on the back of the hands. So I'll be using the Lycra fingerless gloves, which I normally tend to wear in the Australian alpine areas. Scenery-wise, this is a coastal walk, so Western Australian coastal habitat. There are some sections where we do come inland slightly, but it's pretty much a coastal environment. Not really whale season, but certainly if the weather's good, expect to see some, hopefully some dolphins along the way. I think potentially we're likely to see snakes, and I'd also expect to see the typical wildlife you would get in the bush in Western Australia, so wallabies and kangaroos, wombats, all the standard marsupial life you tend to come across, as well as bird life. And I do love the Western Australian parrots and cockatoos. Going into this trip, I have been trying to get myself as fit as possible, and so has Jill. But
I think I'm winning at the moment.
Yeah, I think you probably are. And certainly for me, my last big walk was in the end of December, which was the South Coast Track. I'm expecting this walk to be nowhere near as difficult as that one.
Fingers crossed.
And it's certainly not the change in altitude either, so I think I'm expecting it to be a lot easier to deal with.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to this one. I haven't got a real picture in my mind. I've looked at some of the guidance that's available, but I'm still forming the picture, and maybe that won't become clear until we actually start the hike.
Okay, so as we're recording this podcast, it's actually the Sunday before the start of our walk. And when this podcast goes to air over the next few days, we'll just be within a couple of days of heading off. and we are very much looking forward to this walk. It's been one of the ones on our list for a few years, and it's a chance to get back to Western Australia for the first time since 2018.
Yeah, that's right. I guess when you did the Bibbulmun, I do like the landscape in WA, and it's always a great joy when you head back there. So for those who live there, you're very lucky.
One final comment I would make is we have pretty much self-sufficient on all our food, and we can basically just keep on walking and never go near a town. But given that we're walking past/through Gracetown, which is one of the really obvious locations, and the timing looks about right for a good stop for lunch, so we will certainly avail ourselves of town stops for lunch or coffees as we go. But certainly Gracetown, which is probably going to be our main option there, I think from memory on about the third day. So I'll see how that one goes.
Well, I have to say, I think we've got too much food, Tim. So that will be interesting. My kind of sense is we've, just tipped it over again. And if we take a lunch out or we have a lunch in a town, then we're going to finish with more food than we expected.
Well, we'll see how we go, because we have actually revamped our weekly food carry. So we certainly are starting off with less food than we would normally carry for this walk. So it'll be interesting to see how it works. Okay, that's all for this episode. We hope you've enjoyed this introduction to the Western Australian Cape to Cape track. And we have 3 more episodes to come up in this series, 2 on-trail episodes, as well as a expectations versus reality, where we revisit what we thought was going to be our experience and see how it actually pans out in real life. Okay, that's all for me. Bye for now.
And bye from me.
And then get a train and then a bus back to Perth.
A bus and then a train.
Yeah, so then, we get a train. As the name suggests, this walk travels between 2 capes, and that is Cape
Naturalist and Cape Leeuwin.
As the name suggests, Cape to Cape track, this walk travels between Cape Leeuwin in the north.
In the south.
Fuck.
Jesus. I'll come back when you got it right.